Good day, everyone, and welcome to another creative episode. In today's episode, I will be demonstrating a streetscape starting from beginning and working my way through with the palette knife, hoping to show you guys a little bit more details in my painting process. Here's one example of a streetscape that I took in 2010 in Battery Point, Tasmania. Here's another example of another streetscape with very deep, long, cool shadows. Again, another streetscape where the shadows predominantly dominate the landscape, or in this case, the streetscape. And lastly, this is the image that I'll be demonstrating today. Again, it has a lot of cool tones and shadows with just these beautiful, warm reflections of the buildings that are going to be our point of interest. So sit back and take in the beautiful demonstration. Any comments that you have or ideas or questions regarding the process and how it can help in your studio, feel free to comment below. Thanks for joining, guys. Okay, so let's begin today's painting. This is the color that I used in the last previous painting, or more so the amalgamation of all the different colors that I scraped off the palette board, and basically this is like a grey-green. I don't like throwing any paint that I have left over from the day before. Again, that's purely because first of all, it's a waste to do that. Second, they make such wonderful background highlights and shadows. And yeah, I mean, this is stuff that's absolutely golden. So never throw your old paint away. Now let's begin the painting. So what we're going to work on today is this streetscape. And this is a streetscape from Battery Point in Tasmania. Again, taken somewhere around 2010. And the reason why I chose to demonstrate this artwork is because it has so many shadows. This is a photograph that was taken very early in the morning, and so it's basically pretty much in the cool tones and the highlights of the warm glow that you see on the face of the building. So it'd be a really good composition to start off with. First of all, I'm going to attempt to work it and direct it more into the contemporary side, and then also use a lot more cooler colors, and highlights are going to be those that you see up here, the warm colors. Here's a couple of cool tones that I've just mixed, which is basically your cool red and a cool blue with a little bit of white. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to utilize this green gray from the previous day, and I'm going to treat it as the mother color. If you haven't seen or never heard of the mother color, I've done a video about the mother color and what that is. But in this example, I'm going to use that as my mother color, and I'm going to dip one small dot of that into any new tone that I mix. And that's purely, again, to unify all of the different tones that I create. So let's just, now I'm just going to mix quickly a background mountain color, again keeping that in the cool tone, but I'm going to just take it a little bit more into a cool purple red than these blues up here, and you can see the difference between them. So just as a reminder, here's what this color is here without the mother color, and now I'm going to add a small dab, just that much, and you can see the tip, very, very small dab, and we're going to add that to that background color of the mountain. There we go. And you can see there's a significant difference. This is a lot more duller and this is a lot more brighter of a tone. So yeah, I'm going to use that green gray as the mother color and then unify all of the tones that I create from that one point. Okay, I'm going to start off with the background of the mountains. Again, remember, this is just the first blocking. It's the first blocking of the tone. It's not the final colors at all. And the reason why we add a blocking color is so that as we begin to build the layers, we then have a tone that we can assess our next color on. Otherwise, you'll only be assessing it against the white, and that might appear either too dark or too light. There's that quick mountain. Now I'm going to add the side or that front of the road up here, and you can see that that's a much deeper blue. It's not a lighter blue or lighter purple. Remember that at this point I'm going to go a little bit darker. That's purely because the whole composition is in shadow, so I'm not too concerned whether or not the tones are exactly correct, but I am focusing on keeping as much integrity to the tone as I can at this first stage of painting. Okay, so the next tone that I'm going to add is basically this hill that slopes right in front of this tall mountain. So that's going to be in a little bit more of a warmer purple than what's going to be at the back. So I'm going to just bring that down all the way to that house, even though I know that up here there's a couple of houses on this back hill. I'll add that later on with a palette knife, just as a suggestion, more so than follow the actual instructions of what's on that reference photograph. So this hill now extends all the way here and just comes behind the rooftop of that house. We're going to add that in. And because we've got a tree that's going to be a lot more in shadow here, I might just add a little bit of that hill color here, just so that it looks like it's popping through the tree, but I can give it air holes later in the process. Okay, now that's that there. So we can see we've now created that background tone for the big hill, and the next hill down, this is our middle ground with the houses, and then our foreground is going to be the road right up in front of us. Now this home, pardon me, the tree up here is quite in a darker tone. Again, the reference photograph just does not do it justice, and it's a lot darker than it should be. But keeping up with the ideology of staying or putting in the shadows in the cooler tones, I'm going to do that now for this hill. Sorry, for the tree. So there's, and it's going to be quite a substantial dark cover up here. Now, don't be too scared to put in all these darks, because if you don't have the darks now, it's always harder to go back later. But the thing that, if you haven't realized already with this, the reason why these highlights are going to pop out is because the darks are sufficient enough to let them to come through. So be mindful of that when you're putting that in. Okay, so we've got the tree now up here, and there's the roof line. Okay. Okay. And okay, so I'm not going to move in now with just adding a little bit more of a differentiation in that tree, again, just to give me the idea of what's happening in that background. So I'm going to move in and add a little bit of the green where the tree has not lost its leaves. So that's going to be something like that. Typically on the edges, which is quite common for trees, I suppose. And a little bit at the top, but mostly it's going to have the orange highlights suggesting that the tree is deciduous and it's losing its leaves. Now remember, when you paint as well, I know that this might be an old statement to make, or redundant, I suppose, but if you're new to painting, it's always applicable. You paint from the background forward, meaning you do the sky, mountain, second mountain, tree, and everything basically that sits in front. And the reason for that is that if you were to paint start off from here and work backwards, it feels like then things are stacking on top of one another. It doesn't feel like they're sitting behind one another. You'll know it when you do it and you think this doesn't feel right. So just remember to always paint from the back forward. I know that sometimes I go back and forth, but that's just experience. I sometimes might do a tree and then go, oh crap, I have to go and redo the mountains. But then I work in the soft and hard edges in order to blend them and to look like it was painted back to front. But yeah, like I said, just keep that in mind. These are really just highlights. Eventually what I'm going to do as I start to put in the first layer with the palette knife, these are going to be painted over anyway, so I'm not too concerned. This is really just a reference point and a guide for me at this point to say, you know, this is what's happening up here. Pay attention to that when you start to paint with the palette knife. Now with this second house up here, the roof is got more of a oriental feel to it, meaning it's got a double roof. I'm not going to put that in. You're not going to see that detail, and given that it's going to be more of a contemporary type traditional work, yeah, that's not going to concern me too much. That's what I mean when I say, you know, sometimes photographs are just reference points. I wouldn't really copy them in their entirety. It's really about, you know, creating a painting, not copying a photo. Okay, so then I'm going to add the shadows of these buildings, and I've chosen to go with a cool warm green. Now I say warm because it's in the foreground, but it's still a cool or a shadow green. And again, I'm just going to focus and treat it more of a contemporary style building than putting all the I mean, this building here has got so much detail. It's ridiculous. You need a drafts person to actually come in and put in all the details. So I'm not really too concerned about all of that. What I do like is that there's obviously shadows that you need to be mindful of, because the shadows are what gives dimension to any artwork. So just be mindful of that. Here I'm starting the first layer with the palette knife. Now at this stage, please be mindful. Don't go in gung-ho and just slap it on, because just like every stage, you need to build up the layers. And so starting off slowly and then building it up, spreading it across is the key. And what you'll find is that you'll then slowly begin to build each layer as you go. Now notice how I've put in this section here quite a dark tone for the sky. This is the reason for that is because in most artworks you'll find that each corner of the painting, bottom and the other bottom right, you'll have a different tone, and that's again to make the eye move around the painting, which you'll see once I zoom out. But that's my color tone there for the sky. And now I'm going to light that up and add the next layer up here. Ignore that beep, that was my heater turning itself off. It's got a mind of its own. Okay, and I'm going to add a little bit more white, and also just lighten it up with going to the next tonal value. I think that's way too mauve, and I want it to be a little bit more on the pinker side. Okay. Yeah, that should be okay. Now again, even as you're painting with the palette knife, you really do have to focus on soft edges and hard edges. It's not just about slapping it on. You have to continually have that foundation in your mind as you're painting. Is it receding? Is it coming forward? Is it working with the tone that I'm adding in? It's a continual refinement every time you add a new layer. And the lower we go to the mountains, the lighter that the sky is going to become. Yeah, the language of tones, it's really weird, you know, warming up a cool and cooling up a warm. But once you start to practice that in your artwork, and then it's really through mixing colors on your palette board in your studio. Once you do that, you begin to understand what I mean. But at this stage, yeah, that I need those mountains to recede, but not be so cool that they don't amalgamate with the actual composition. So in some sections of that background that I've put in, you see that I'm actually going to leave that to come through. I'm not going to, you know, focus too much on bringing it forward, on covering it, sorry. And okay, so given that the sun's coming from the right direction, part of that mountain is in direct sunlight. So I'm just going to add a couple of hints of the sun hitting certain aspects of that mountain. Again, this is the beginning stages. I'm not making that shadow too bright. But if I was going to, I would add something like that. Yeah, I quite like painting morning compositions because you've got that play on cool and warm tones, and that works quite nice. I'm just going to soften that edge there of that mountain and the sky. And the reason, again, remember why you're softening edges is because it recedes it into something. If you want something to stand out, then you'd want to give it a nice crisp edge. That's quite nice. I'm playing around at this point just for demo purposes, but I will come back to the highlights. Okay, so there's that distant mountain. We're going to keep that in there for the moment and move into our next portion, which is that mountain that sits in front of that other one. And remember, this here is basically where the tree is going to go on top of, but I need to think of putting that in at this point so that I can create the air holes at a later date. But there's the roof line of my building. Now be mindful to get it as nice and crisp, because that's going to let us know of that roof being there later on. Okay. And bring that more down here as well. Okay. I do want to add a little bit more of a lighter value on that mountain. So just going to, wait, that's too pink. I'm going to mix a new value and just add a little bit more of a highlight. And that's just for my reference more than anything. See, the moment and this is what I wanted to see, the moment that I've just added this next value, this mountain for me is in a totally wrong tonal value, absolutely totally wrong. It needs to be a lot warmer than what it is right now. So I'd have to correct that before I go any further. Yeah, totally wrong. And I've lost the shape of the mountain here. I should have gone a little bit lower with the the sky. So I'm just going to correct that as well at the same time. Sometimes it's not a bad thing to actually make a mistake, because you kind of get to take artwork in a new direction. And as I said before at the start of this composition, be mindful of your drawing, because it can really disappear on you very quickly when you're working with a palette knife. So keeping a track on of your drawing is really important. And that's much better tonal value. Get rid of that cool colour. That sits a lot better than the tone that was on there before. Okay. Much better. Absolutely much better. Fantastic. Quite like that. And I'm quite liking now what's happening in this business up here. There's a real nice movement aspect to it, which I quite like there's something happening in the clouds are rearranging themselves. So I'm just going to add a little bit more of that difference. I'm bringing in that white over the edge of that pink right in there. Okay, quite good. All right, next stage. For this next stage of adding in the darks in the tree, I'm actually going to use a brush. When you're adding darks with the palette knife, it will look really heavy and caking. And in artworks, it's really nice to have that thin, thick layer. So in this case, I'm just going to go over that dark and add in a bit darker layer with a brush. So okay, so now I'm adding in the orange deciduous leaves of this tree. Okay, now again, I'm being very light, even though it doesn't seem like it. With the spatula, it's incredibly light touch. So notice the amount that I've got on my palette knife and how you can see that there's a lot more on one side, and that's probably because I work this way, than on the other side of the knife. So this is the amount that I've put on, not a lot. And now we're going to add the highlights around this area here. Again, keep in mind not to cover up your darks. Otherwise, you'll have to go back in there, re-scrape the orange, which is a process. So very light touch of adding those deciduous leaves on. In this instance, using this size palette knife, so I've gone a little bit to the larger size, is quite handy because you get to be able to do straight lines, and also because my other favorite palette knife is lost its straightness. It's got a curve on it from overuse, but yeah, having this size knife for this is quite handy because you can create that sharp edge on a building. And in this instance, again, you know, I talk about soft and hard edges a lot. This is when this comes in handy. I'm not too meticulous about it all, but again, I give it enough of an emphasis that that building is, you know, it retains its structure, so to speak. Okay. Yes, I'm going to use my brush, a small brush, just to act as a drawing tool and go over those darks and add what looks like detail, but it really is just a drawing, I suppose, of that building without adding too much definition or too much detail. I still like to keep it quite fresh and contemporary without being a draftsman's style artwork kind of thing. So yeah, I'm very much still treating it quite loosely. I'm painting it quite loosely. Sorry, that's the better terminology. Yeah, so that's why I'm kind of going over it with the brush. By the way, if you're hearing me stutter or stop and start, it's because it's quite challenging to narrate and paint and talk at the same time because I'm using different parts of my brain. So you find me sometimes stopping in the middle of something is because I'm thinking of how to actually paint and work that area, and therefore my brain kind of stops talking. But that's the reason for the stuttering. I'm just going to use my other palette knife that's got the straighter edge versus my little one because it just doesn't have that straight edge anymore. I'm just going to include that. Okay. And also the good thing is with these larger palette knives, they tend to grab the paint and move it down a lot better than my little one. So yeah, I don't mind it. I quite like how this is a really subtle edge and the colors are mixing in together. So if you do have those great happenstances, try not to lose them. They're absolutely magic. Yeah, so then I'm just going to play and work in this side here, which is again in the shade before I put any highlights at the top. I quite like that, so I've got to focus on that, and then we'll come up to the chimney in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to stop the narration up here and continue completing this artwork. So hopefully that gave you guys a little bit more of an insight again for working with the palette knife. But in the meantime, enjoy the completion of the painting, and I'll see you once this is done. Okay. Okay, so here's the completed thus far artwork. There's a lot more ways that I can improve it and add highlights, but it has gotten to a point where even for me, the paint is far too wet, and I'm starting to notice that I'm overworking this area in the painting. But for the moment, this is where I'm going to stop and leave it and then come back to it with fresh eyes, hopefully tomorrow or perhaps in a couple of days. So here's the reference photograph, and this is the up-to-date artwork.
All I want